Good morning. We will just give it a minute for people to turn up. And I do have a PDF version of the board that I'm presenting from. Padlet, there we go. Did have a number of people register for the session this morning, so hopefully they'll be here in a moment. Otherwise, I will kick off at, 2 or 3 past the hour, I guess. While we're just waiting a moment, Daniel, if you've got a particular area of Zoom that you would like me to make sure that I look at today, if you want to drop that into the chat, etc., I'm more than happy for you to do that. If not, we'll stick to the standard script. Okay. Well, I think we might get into it, and then when people show, we'll deal with that. Okay. So look, welcome to another Teaching Academy PD session for the 60 series. My name's Lachlan Kalish. I'm the Learning Innovation Lead in the Division of Learning and Teaching. And today's session, we're focusing on Zoom, or online meeting as CSU rebrands the tool. And we're going to be looking at a session that is part refresher, part updates and new features, and also part Q&A, really. So each time we run this, you get the potential for people of all confidence levels with Zoom, from people that have never used it before to those that have been using it for years, looking for tips and tricks, etc. So some things I will gloss over fairly superficially, just to make sure that people are comfortable with that, and other areas I will go into more depth in. So the session is being recorded, and the recording, slides and any other artifacts will be available shortly after the session finishes. So let's get into this. I will start with the first slide. I can see we've got someone that's just turned up. Let's deal with that. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is just make sure, coming into the Zoom space, that people are familiar and comfortable with the terminology that we're using. And particularly, we have 3 kind of potential starting points when we talk about Zoom. One of them is the Zoom desktop application. So the software that's installed on your computer that you can probably find an icon for on your desktop or in your applications list. The CSU Zoom portal, which is also called the back end, and the Zoom Brightspace integration, which is called LTI, or Learning Technology Interoperability, but LTI is the term you'll see around the place. We're going to look at all 3 of those today, but I want you to make sure that you're comfortable with the distinction between them, because more often than not, you get people that will jump between talking about all 3 of those, sometimes in the same conversation, and people can get lost very, very quickly. So it is important that you're really comfortable with the difference between them. I will also add that if you've got questions, comments, etc., I'll make sure I can see the chat underneath here as well. Just pop them into the chat, and I'll be stopping periodically for questions and comments in that space. All right, so look, let's start with the Zoom desktop app. So on my desktop, I'm on a CSU machine. I can see a shortcut to the application here. It's now being called Zoom Workplace. They had a rebrand not that long ago, and it's now referred to as Zoom Workplace. And double clicking on that will open the desktop application. If you can't see it on your computer, and a lot of people that are on home machines, etc., sometimes have to search for it, simply typing in Zoom into your search will bring up the same app and you can launch it there. So either or, but it is referred to as the Zoom desktop app. And when we open it, it gives us this lovely little box. And it'll have those 4 icons that you're probably familiar with. It allows you to launch new meetings on the spot. A lot of people don't really use the desktop app that much at Charles Sturt, but I will say it has been where most of the attention around using Zoom in the past kind of 2 years of development has focused on improvements to this particular tool set, to the desktop application. So it is worth noting that periodically you should be coming back in here to check to see if they've added new features, because some of them are actually pretty decent. And we'll have a look at those this morning. So the main reason that people generally come into the desktop app is to check for updates. And this is a good opportunity for you to do that if you haven't already. Clicking on your profile picture in the top right-hand corner, left click once, and you'll see the check for updates option. Zoom is prolific in terms of its updates. A lot of the time that won't have any impact on your experience using the product. Some of the time it'll stop you using it altogether. So it is worth checking that periodically. If we click on that, we find out that the current version is in fact 6.5.3 and I'm up to date. You may not be. If not, you can update your Zoom. It won't let you do that while you're in a Zoom meeting, but otherwise it takes about 20 to 30 seconds. So check that. Encourage your students to check that in your teaching space as well, because it can blow out pretty quickly. There's also a hyperlink there to their updates and features, etc. If you're not sure what's in the tool set now, you can open the Zoom webpage from there, which will show you a list of all of the features that have been added into all of those updates periodically. Sometimes it's just filled with bug fixes and other things of little interest to us, but occasionally you'll find some things added to the Zoom meeting tool set, so the live use of Zoom meetings, that does impact us and that is probably of far more interest to you. So that's the information that you get from looking at the Zoom desktop app and making sure that you're up to date. The other things that you may be interested in checking in that profile area, left clicking on your image, is your ability to be able to set statuses like we do in Teams, and to change your profile information if you don't want your picture showing, or different images or avatars and other things. You can change all those through your profile settings. The last thing I want to point out to you for the moment in the desktop application is that there is a settings area. Look for the little cog in the top right hand corner. And particularly, I want to draw your attention to an area in here called Share Screen. If you've never checked this before, it's worth looking at, because there is a setting in here called Show My Zoom Workplace Application and Meeting Windows. This is about when you share your screen in a Zoom meeting, if you want the participants to be able to see your Zoom taskbar or your Zoom setting areas and things like that, they're not going to be able to see them by default. They'll get large black blocks on the screen, etc., hiding what it is that you're doing in Zoom. I leave mine on. I don't have a problem with them seeing the toolbar, etc., but that's up to you to toggle on or off, depending on your own preference. So there are a number of other settings in this area that you may want to gloss through at least once to check on, but the most important one really is to make sure that you've had a look at your share screen settings. So we're going to come back to the Zoom desktop application a bit later on when we're looking at some, I guess, cool tools that are in here now, but that's the main sort of introductory piece, is making sure you know what it is, where to find it, and that you can obviously search for it or hopefully find it on your desktop. Zoom is also very closely integrated with Outlook now at Charles Sturt, and you'll notice that your meetings, etc., that are in your Outlook calendars, whether they're in Teams or Zoom or other things, will also be listed in the desktop application. When you open it, this kind of workspace area will also show your calendar items as well. So all these apps are now talking to each other to some extent. All right, I'm going to stop there. Does anyone have any specific questions around the desktop application before I move on? And if we're good to go, then by all means, give me a thumbs up or put it in the chat or whatever, and we'll move on. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Janine. Okay, so that's the desktop application. We will revisit it, as I said, when we want to start looking at some of the tools and uses. The next one that I mentioned was the CSU Zoom portal. It's also called the backend, and we find it at this address, charlessturt.zoom.us. And this one is particularly important because it's where people can go to make sure they are signed in to Zoom using their CSU login details. The most common problems we get in DLT and DIT around students and particularly sessional staff, etc., not having access to the things they need to in Zoom is because people haven't signed in to their Charles Sturt University Zoom account. That needs to happen through this address by clicking the sign in button. If your teaching team members, colleagues, etc., have never used Zoom at CSU before, then there's a high probability that they don't have an account in the system yet against their CSU name, and the way that they create that is by signing into that portal. So make sure that you're getting them to do that first, even if they're not hosting any meetings, etc. They have to have that account, and the way they do it is by signing in through the portal. So the back end, or the CSU Zoom portal that we're looking at, is basically all of the back end settings and artifacts associated with your Zoom meetings. So you can create meetings here, you can get your recording details, you can get statistics around your Zoom meetings, you can get analytics around your Zoom meetings and recordings, etc. It is the complete collection of everything associated with your Zoom account. The settings box that we looked at in the desktop application, if you recall, when I clicked on that little cog, is an abbreviated version of the settings available to you inside the Zoom portal, inside the backend. You get all of them in here. And if you go into your settings area on the left-hand side in the Zoom portal, you will see the number of tabs and menus items that they need to organize all of those settings is pretty comprehensive. Can be quite daunting as well, but they do have a search area for you to search for things if you're not sure. So as an example, people might ask me at times about things like captioning. So at that point, if I was wondering about settings for captions in Zoom, then I could just type in caption as a search item, and all of the settings related to captions will instantly pop up. So that quick search feature in the Zoom portal is kind of handy. If you're trying to kind of filter through, as I said, all of those different areas of settings. I'm not going to go diving through those settings today unless one of you has specific questions about something that you're trying to find. Again, drop it into the chat or come off mute, whatever you like, and I'm happy to get into that. But there's no way I'm going to break down all of those settings in a 1-hour training session. So that's one thing that people will go into the back end or the CSU Zoom portal to do. Some people will create their meetings from here underneath the meetings area on the left, starting with a process of scheduling a meeting, working through the settings in here so we can give it topic, then we populate at least the initial date that the thing might be happening. So for example, if I was saying from next Tuesday at 6 o'clock at night, I'm not going to do this exhaustively, but we'll say 6 p.m. for an hour, I'm having a meeting, and I'm going to have it every week at that same time. So I'm going to make it a recurring meeting. That recurrence is happening weekly. And then I get to specify, yes, it's a Tuesday that it's happening each time. And when do I want it to stop? I will say at this point, my experience with this particular end date option with your meeting settings, the best way to do this is to use an end date rather than a specific number of occurrences. This particular option seems to have a bit of a bug where it will only show the first 10, for example, to some people. So even though there are others there, when you're looking at the list of meetings in Brightspace, if we're using the integration, it seems to cut off at 10 if you use this option. So steer away from it, put in your end date. So if that's the end of session, for example, whatever that might be, I'm going to say October something. Let's go the 28th. And at that point, we continue with our configuration. You can add in specific people that you want to invite to that meeting from here, but we rarely do that within Zoom itself. We don't have registration turned on by default. I'll talk more about whiteboards in a little bit, but I don't generally set any of these things up from when I'm creating the meetings. My default is to have video and audio turned off for participants when they come in, so it's an opt-in type of setup. It's up to you whether you want all those things on and someone entering the room with the cat going off in the background. That's up to you. And then we can open our options area, and we have a decision to make around whether or not you want students to have access to your Zoom meetings before you get there. This is an important one for you to think about, because if you're using this setting, you cannot turn on the automatically record option, because at that point students are being recorded without their permission. So normally for my own settings, I don't have a problem with them turning up with me not there. They're only going to be able to stay in a Zoom meeting without a host for a short period of time before it kicks them out anyway. So I usually have that turned on. I don't know about the Q&A. More recently, Zoom has made the question and answer pod available in your Zoom meetings, but for me, I still just use the chat predominantly. That's up to you whether you have it turned off or on, but if it's turned on, you'll need to monitor it for questions. The other one is, as I said above, I have people muted when they come into the room so that they unmute themselves when they have something to ask. It's almost impossible to use pre-assigned breakout rooms at Charles Sturt with our students, because it requires that everyone that you want in those breakouts to already have a CSU Zoom account, to have signed up and registered. So if you've got 100 students, all of them will have been required at some point to sign in for a Zoom account, and you will need to then search for them and add them in that way. Normally when we use breakouts, we split them up in the live meeting itself. We distribute the students that way. The pre-assign option sounds nice in theory, but it does require that everyone there has signed into their Zoom accounts, is a registered user that's already established in the system. So it makes it a bit hard and probably means you're going to be spending a bunch of time trying to allocate people even after you've pre-assigned. I could see Robin adding something in here. Have you got a question for me, Robin, or I'm happy to wait for it as well?
No, all good. Sorry.
That's okay. Not a problem. Okay, so as I said, for some people that want to use automatically record, and it is still a somewhat popular feature for people that don't want to have to worry about hitting the record option in Zoom meetings, just keep in mind, as soon as someone enters that room, the recording starts. If you're not happy with what's there at the beginning, etc., you're going to need to edit those recordings. So it potentially can create work rather than save work in that respect. Alternative hosts with Zoom meetings, you're probably aware, they need to be CSU Zoom account holders. So that same process that I mentioned before of signing in to either log into your existing account or to create an account if you've never done it before, they have to have done that before you can add them as an alternative host. And again, we get lots of jobs being logged with people saying, I have a new lecturer for my subject, why can't I add them to my Zoom meetings? They're going to be lecturing it. And the answer is they've never signed in to the CSU Zoom portal. Get them to sign in once, then you'll be able to add them here as alternative hosts. Otherwise, this will come up with an error. All right, so we've created our first set of Zoom meetings in the back end in the Zoom portal. That's one way of going about it. It gives us a summary, it gives us a link. And for many staff, what they're doing at that point is copying that link and providing it to students or other people in announcements, in emails, etc. That's been the standard way of providing Zoom meeting information for quite some time since we've had Zoom, but it's not without issue. And the main problem with doing that is we have no way to, I guess, guarantee that the people using that link are not going to have problems getting into the meeting. They're going to be stuck in a waiting room probably if they're a guest and they haven't signed in, and then you'll have to spend time admitting them. And I'm sure probably everyone in here may have had that experience at one time or another, having to admit users into a meeting when really you want to focus on actually running the session. I am going to launch Zoom itself for us to go through the interface in a moment. But I have a few other areas of the Zoom portal that I want to go through here. This meeting ID number can be quite important. So when you create a meeting like this through the Zoom portal, through the back end, it's worth making a note of what that meeting ID is, because you might need it either if you're searching for recordings, if you're wanting to actually import this meeting into your Brightspace site, you're going to need the meeting ID. If you're searching for analytics around attendees, etc., you're going to need that ID. So if you need to come looking for that information, you'll find it in here against your meeting information. If I go back to my meeting list, we'll see now that that list of upcoming meetings from soonest through to least soon will be listed here in front of us, and you can go in and then modify each of those individual meeting names if you want to change the details. So this is our traditional way of creating Zoom meetings through the back end. Other bits of note through the Zoom portal, through the back end, is that you can get access to other tools that you might be using in your Zoom meetings, such as the Zoom whiteboards, and we're going to open that in a moment, the notes tool, surveys if you're creating those in Zoom. Zoom uses the term surveys really to apply for any live activity that you run where you're asking for input from the users in the meetings. So quizzes, for example, and surveys, some of them have answers and need to be launched and moderated live by you. Others can be run asynchronously, but all of it fits under this banner of surveys. Any recordings that you make in Zoom, you'll find underneath the recordings tab. And this is where we would come ultimately if you needed to edit your recordings. So that's why I'm in here at this point, is I want to look at the editing of recordings. This is the only place that you can do that. You have to come into the back end, find your recordings. You may need to search for them by your meeting ID. There is an advanced search option which may allow you to set some date parameters, but by and large, you're probably going to be looking at via the ones that you've made. You may not see all of the recordings that I do, probably because of my settings that I have in Zoom. But if you have to go searching, get that meeting ID that you're looking for. If you have downloaded, even accidentally, your recordings to your own computer, you'll still be able to find them collected underneath this tab, Computer Recordings. So you can still get a hold of those, but you're not going to be able to import them into your subject site for your students. It's just been saved locally on your computer. Usually that happens by mistake. Let's have a look at the editor. This changes a little bit over time. What can I do? I might pinch someone's recording, but not save it. Let's find any recording. This will do. I'm going to open one of these by clicking on it. And then what I can do, you'll notice here it gives me a summary of the recording details. And by default, we get one single hyperlink that we share with students that will give them access to the recording in their web browser, but they can then download all of these individual artifacts from the recording. So if you're recording a shared screen, the audio file, transcripts, chat files, captions, all of those are individual downloadable artifacts. And if you just want some of those, you can come into this backend and then download them or link to them from this recordings area in the portal. So it's quite handy at times. And if you want to get rid of them altogether, you can delete them from here as well. But usually we're just given one link that we give to people so that they can open a recording in a web browser, like so. And if the student hits download, you'll see they get all of them at once. So they don't really have a choice at that point over what they do and don't get. But that's the difference between going into the back end and having that choice over which artifacts you want to get a hold of versus getting one link where you have to get all of them. When you're the host who's created the videos, you'll see that they open in the browser like this for you. You can watch back the whole thing, use this continuum to move along the recording, but it also has all these other things happening around it now. There are some AI features that Zoom has available for you to use with your editing of your recordings. It has a tool called a Smart Chapter Summary, for example, where it's automatically trying to figure out and organize the information that's happening through the recording based on what's being shown on the screen and what you're saying. It will have an attempt at organizing that information automatically. You can turn off smart chapters if you don't want them. You can edit the smart chapters if you want to use them, or you can ignore them altogether and just be giving students your actual recording itself rather than all this other stuff. You'll also notice that your transcript is here on the right-hand side, and you can edit the transcript if you want to go and make changes to it before giving it to students. So it's editable through the recording interface. But probably what you're most interested in is how to modify the Zoom recordings themselves. And the way that that happens is using this little scissors icon, the trim icon, that's only going to be visible to hosts who have created the meeting. It's not going to be available to other academics, to students, etc. Only the person who creates the Zoom meeting in the first instance can actually make these edits to the recording. So if I click on trim, it gives me this highlighted blue continuum now. And the core rule here is whatever's highlighted is what the students will get. So if I want to modify this and say, actually, I want the students only to get, I don't want them to get the first, 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Now, if I hit this word trim, it's going to change the recording, including the recording they download, so that it only plays that amount. So I can make a single trim, or I can in fact make multiple trims. So I've narrowed that one down saying I want that part. Maybe I want to cut out another piece and I can make a second trim and a third, etc., etc. So the editor now in Zoom allows you to modify multiple parts of the recording to cut them out, but it's not quite the same way that we do cropping in more traditional video editing tools where you're highlighting the thing you want to remove. This is highlighting the parts that you want to keep. So it works a little bit differently to what you might be used to. You can then hit play. It'll play through the parts that you've decided to keep. So you can go, that's right, that's not right, make adjustments. And then when you're happy with it, you hit trim and you're done. It has then changed the recording that students get. You can revert back to the original if you need to. If you make a mistake, Zoom does save that in the background for you. But by default, as soon as you hit trim, that's the recording has been modified. How are we going so far? Are people fairly comfortable with what I've covered thus far? Is any of it news to you? What do we think? Thumbs up from a few of you. Excellent. All right. It is worth checking in on this because Zoom changes the tool set periodically. And when they change the recording interface, I don't think anyone really was told, and you only really discover it once you go in and start trying to do this. But usually the most common type of job that we get around recordings is people saying either the beginning or the end, there's something I really don't want in here. So that means you need to know how to do the trimming. It's pretty simple, but keep in mind that what you highlight is what you keep. That's the main rule around that. Okay, you may notice that there is reference in Zoom now to a feature called Clips. Now, Zoom Clips is a tool that allows you to make 2-minute recordings that you can then embed, videos that you can embed, and they will stay forever wherever you want to put them. So with our normal recordings in Zoom, you're probably aware they have a 365-day timer on them from the moment you make them, and they will auto-delete after a year. You'll get a warning about it 7 days before it disappears, but by default, they will automatically delete themselves from the system after a year. Clips, on the other hand, are much shorter videos, up to 2 minutes, and you can keep them indefinitely and embed them inside your subject site. So I think it's probably worth looking at that feature. Pardon me, just for a moment. So I'm going to close this recording. I'm not messing with that academics recording. And we'll find Clips right here underneath recordings and transcripts. This is my personal clips. So I'm going to make a new clip. So I've got this option here. I can record it or I can upload one and then edit it, but I'm going to record one on the spot. It uses the same software that Zoom uses for the recording. So at the moment, it's asking me, what do I want to capture? Do I want to share my screen, head in a box, just me talking, for example? It's probably struggling because I'm using my my webcam for Teams. So let's change to my laptop's webcam. That should do the job. There we are. And I'll start the recording. So I get 2 minutes. Right, so I make my recording. I do like how it's got the logo here reversed. That's excellent. So this is a head in a box type recording. It's going to make that. I can still turn on sharing and share parts of my computer screen if I need to. Yes, thanks, Robin. So it's just like sharing your screen in Zoom, exactly the same tool set, but it's making the recording on the spot. And I can pause it and then unpause and keep recording. I can get rid of it. I can restart it. But in this case, I'm going to hit stop, which I could do here or here. And it's now processing a video for me that it's made on the spot. And you'll notice that it's now using that Zoom desktop application under a tab called Clips to allow me to access that recording that I just made and make adjustments to it. If I want to crop it, for example, I can do it from here. But what I can do with that clip recording, I mean, I could play it here, but brilliant. It's definitely my recording. But what I can do with that, clicking on share, it gives me either a hyperlink that I can share with people. I can set privacy settings on it, but it's universal by default, so anyone with the link gets it. So I could say, oh, you guys definitely need that recording link. But I can also use this embed option to get an embed code. And at that point, I could, for example, use a content area inside Brightspace and say, I want a new page to put my recording, and say, turn on my embed code button, which is right there, source code, paste that, Control V, and hit save. And I've just made a video that is now embedded within my learning materials. Right, so I know a lot of you probably use Panopto for this, but if you are making quick videos, this is a very simple and easy way of doing that, up to 2 minutes, and it's embeddable and it doesn't get deleted. So if you're comfortable with the Zoom toolset for doing this sort of thing, it's not a bad option for quick videos that we can make on the spot. So that is the Clips feature. Have a play around with it. Maybe you've got an application for it. Welcome to students, other things, whatever. Maybe you're never going to touch it, but it is there. And in the Zoom portal itself, you'll find it underneath this Clips area. Okay, I am going to stop talking about the Zoom portal, the Zoom back end, and now get into the Brightspace area of this tool so we can start looking at the interface, some new tools, and some other nifty things I'd like to show you. Stuart, go ahead.
Before we move off clips, I wasn't listening fully. Let's say I've fully recorded a normal tute, but I've got something that's really, really important midway through. So can I make a clip specifically
Absolutely.
just out of that by restricting, top and tail, that whatever's there?
Yeah, absolutely. So within the recordings area, if you open up one of those recordings to edit what we were doing a minute ago, open it in your browser, use your trim function to get the bit that you're after. You'll notice up here we've got this add to Zoom clips option up in the top right hand corner. So that will take the whole recording by default and put it in there for you to modify, but it'll make you limit it to 2 minutes before it lets you publish it. So this will back it up into the clips area and then you modify it. Yeah, it's pretty good. If you've got something worthwhile from what you've already recorded within Zoom, you can make a clip out of sections of it easily. Even if you wanted to split up your entire recording into a series of clips, you could do that as well. So it's not a bad feature for them to have added in, I don't think. Okay, let's get into the actual Zoom interface for running a PD session on Zoom that's not in Zoom. We'll open a new meeting for us to have a look at that tool set, and I'm going to do it from the Zoom desktop application and just launch a new meeting here. All right, it prompts you now about the whatever devices you happen to be using. I think this time again, you can use my laptop's webcam. You can turn on backgrounds if you want them or don't want them, but we'll start. Okay, so here's our Zoom interface, and we're going to focus in on the actual tool set that we have down the bottom and work through this quickly. I want to focus on new features. Again, if you've got particular things you want me to zoom in on, pardon the pun, let me know. All right, so our full Zoom screen by default is showing videos, webcams, etc., and nothing else until we start customizing that interface. So the things that I like to have when I run Zoom, I want to get a look at who's in the room, so I'm going to turn on participants. It's now opened that merged as part of my window, but if I want this to be separate, maybe on another screen, I can use this pop-out function, and it gives me the participant pod that I can move around, maybe onto another screen. If you are wanting it all together on the one page, you can use the 3 dots at the bottom now to merge this to your existing Zoom meeting. But I definitely want to use the participant pod. And at that point, I can have some level of control over what's happening with the people in the room. Maybe one of the most useful aspects, I can mute everybody else in the room if I need to. So usually this happens when you've got a bunch of people coming in and you haven't muted them by default, and they're throwing you off, etc. Maybe you need to mute them. Hosts and co-hosts have access to that feature. All right, let's keep going. Chat. I definitely want to see the chat, and I've now added that as another pod underneath to my merged single Zoom meeting interface. Again, if I want that separate, I can pop it out, resize it, have it on another screen if I want to. Or again, if I'm happy with it to be merged, you can use those 3 dots and merge. Interestingly, let's have a look at the chat for just a moment longer. The chat window has changed again in Zoom. They now have a subgroup chat function. You'll notice that by default we have chatting to individual people, but we now have this button up the top that says I can start a new chat, and every user has access to this unless you start toggling it off in your settings, where I can start off a private conversation in the background with Stuart, for example, so we could be chatting as well at the same time, and then I need to toggle between everybody and those subgroup chats. There was a version of it available beforehand. They've just worked on sort of making it a bit more clear now through these buttons. So subgroup chat or chat to everybody. And our options, when we use the chat, I'm not sure if you can see these or if they're too small. We have our basic formatting options that are now part of the Zoom chat, where you can use things like indenting and bullets and pasting of quotes and hyperlinks, code snippets. You can do all sorts of bits and pieces in the Zoom chat now. And you also have the option of saving that chat. So if I put something in the chat here and sent it through to everybody, it's now sitting in the chat. If I wanted to get a hold of the chat, you'll see clicking on the three dots in the top, I can save the chat and get a text file saved on my device. So that Zoom chat, I want to merge it to the other windows. So three dots, merge, it's now sitting underneath. These are my sort of default go-tos in most Zoom meetings when I run them, but there are some more tools that may make you rethink what you're using here. So we'll keep moving. And again, if you've got particular questions, put them in the chat in Teams. Zoom reactions. You've probably seen these before. They give more and more attention to this stuff now. If we have a look at the reactions, there are new emojis all over the place. There are reactions, core reactions. If you click on them, they'll float up the screen and the host and other people in there will see them. A bit gimmicky, but that's where they are. You might be telling people, use your reactions to indicate where you're up to. And you'll notice when we do that and when your audience uses that, you can see underneath your participant information, those icons captured as well. So at that point, if you wanted a quick show of hands or a quick thumbs up or thumbs down in Zoom, tell people, use your reactions just to give me an idea, or if you've got questions. So next one that's going to be used is hands up, for example. Raise hand, and it stays raised in the participant area. So I'm not trying to keep track of everyone's webcam or anything. I'm just saying if you've got a question, raise your hand and it will summarize those here underneath as well. So the participant pod is actually quite useful for sort of classroom management, so to speak, in a Zoom session. All right, I'm going to lower my hand and show you something new. You may have seen this or not. Reactions now has a recognition feature that's built into the webcam. So I'm going to, if you haven't togged it on, you can turn on this recognize hand gestures. And this is how it works. Lachlan raises his hand. There's a little timer. And it's now raised my hand. So for those people who take things literally and they're raising their hands, they can actually raise their hand and it will register like that. The other one that it has is thumbs up. Everyone okay with that? See the timer underneath, and then Lachlan has thumbs up. Is it a gimmick? Is it useful to you? Your call. But it's now available. So it's doing sort of video recognition. Okay, the share screen is worth looking at. This is something that people use probably more than anything else in Zoom. It's probably fairly familiar to you. It allows you to select either whole screens or application windows for your sharing. It allows you to share and focus on individual documents like Word documents, PDF, etc., that you can upload and share within the room. It has integrations with other tools like OneDrive, Google Drive, etc., if you've got those files saved in those places. Most people are probably just sharing their screen and opening the artifact that they want to work on for people to look at. And that's perfectly fine. That's what I do as well. There are some interesting additions more recently to the share functions, however. Over here on the right-hand side, they have an area called layouts that allows you to configure how you're sharing. And if you want your participants to be able to hear sound or to help buffer video that's playing back, things like YouTube and other stuff, you're going to want to check this optimize for video sharing box, and that will make sure that it's not using too much bandwidth for all of the users when you share. It's worth checking for people that are in places where they have low bandwidth. They also have a number of different sharing layouts. So for example, if I wanted to share my screen, but make sure that everybody looking at this is going to see my head as well while I'm sharing, let's have a look at what that looks like. And you can't because you're not in the Zoom meeting. So let me just move my toolbar back over. When we share the screen, you get a share toolbar you're probably familiar with. At the bottom of the share toolbar, there's a little drop-down space, which is a preview. And what that allows you to do, if I actually move my Zoom screen off here, this is what that preview looks like. It's sharing my whole desktop with my face embedded underneath, superimposed on it. So if you want, for example, to get that augmented kind of look of your body on top of the thing that you're presenting, PowerPoint slides, etc., PDFs, you can certainly do that. Otherwise, you're just in that space. All right, let's keep going with the layouts. There's a couple of other options. And I'll find those by finding my share area. So I'm going to stop sharing, or I'll just click share again. It will allow me to change those settings again. Some of the other options that we have are my head at the bottom of the screen that you can resize, as well as what you're sharing in a part of the Zoom space, rather than as a separate box. I don't know, you might decide that these are gimmicky. Maybe they're what you want to use. Maybe you're using them just to make your own recordings without an audience. Play around with it, see what you want to do with it. It also allows you to put wallpapers behind the thing that you're sharing. So if I turned on this sort of desert oasis-y thing, it's going to have that in the background behind a window of what I'm sharing, and then my head speaking underneath. Maybe that's the look that you're going for. It just gives you a bit of customization available in how we share now, rather than simply just share my screen. Again, up to you, depends how comfortable you are with those features, but they have added a few extras in that space in recent times. All right, I'll stop sharing there so we can keep looking at other parts of the interface. Let's move my Zoom window back and make sure I can see any questions coming through. All right, so we looked at sharing. Host tools down the bottom. You can import images for the wallpaper, Stuart. Yes, but it's got to be done through the back end, through the Zoom portal, for you to be able to see it there. That's me saying it in a very concise form. Host tools used to be called security. It's worth opening up to have a look at, because it allows you as the host to do things like lock the meeting. If you're using Zoom for a scenario where you cannot have anyone else coming into that room, you can lock it on the spot from the host tools. Interactive Orals springs to mind. Scenarios like that, I cannot have anyone coming in here, even by mistake. Lock the meeting, no one else is coming in. So that feature is available to you here. You can turn off the waiting room that's enabled by default from here. So that's possible as well. But it also gives you a top-down view of everything that the people in the meeting can do or not do. So if you want to control them being able to share, not share, that's toggleable from here. Same with chat, same with muting, same with video settings. All of these features and settings can be controlled through the back-end settings area, but as I mentioned, there are hundreds of settings in there. This is the most sort of crucial ones. Yeah, they'll basically be put in a, not even the waiting room. It's like a lobby area that with a notification that says that the meeting's currently locked. Yeah, that's exactly right, Dan. Okay, let's keep going through. I'm not going to talk about Zoom apps today, but in a nutshell, Zoom has its own app store with integrations for different tools that work to a lesser or greater extent with Zoom alongside it. I haven't had a massively positive experience with those, with the one exception maybe being tools like the countdown tool or the timer tool. So if I open my apps, for example, the ones that I've got that I've used, and I very rarely use these. There are some for things like virtual backgrounds, but there's also a timer tool that will allow you to do countdowns within the Zoom meeting quite effectively. Play around with it if you like, but I'm not going to spend any time talking about it today. Notes, however, I am going to talk about because I really like this feature. Zoom Notes opens up in a new share pane. You can pop it out if you want to, or merge it, make it bigger or smaller, and it is a collection of notes that you may have made in different meetings that are saved against your profile. You can re-import them or reuse them in any Zoom meeting you go into, or you can make a new one on the spot. But these are effectively a collaborative workspace, or you can use them just individually for yourself. If I open it up, I've got new notes that are being used for this session. I can give it a particular name if I want to, but it is a collaborative text content sharing area. And then I get to decide who gets to see it, who gets to contribute to it. So if I click on share, I can share it to the meeting on the spot so everyone in the room can start adding to it. And then afterwards, I can leave it up so it's still live. As long as that meeting essentially isn't deleted, the notes will stay around, and then you can share it to people afterwards. So you're creating a collaborative document that people can work on, they can print it, you can send the links out to other people, and it can be used asynchronously as well. It's actually pretty good. Yeah, absolutely, Kim. As long as you've given, as people are either in the meeting, they'll be able to engage with it, or you give them the hyperlink to it, for example, to the notes. So maybe you make the note beforehand. You can make it in the back end in your settings, or you can make it in a live meeting. Either or, get the link, share it out to everybody, and say, right, I want everyone going into here and adding to it. I've seen it used to good effect in sessions for people to be looking at focused questionings or agenda items, or sort of wiki-like activities, or just sort of group-based notes that they're contributing to. It's pretty good, but you'll need to play around with it a little bit and get used to the fact that until you actually click to share it with people, it's only going to be available just to you. And then you get to decide who else gets to use it as well. So it can be shared to the public. They don't have to be CSU account holders. They don't have to be in the meeting itself. You get to decide who gets to use it. And in that point, once you click share to, you then get to decide whether you just want it used passively or whether it's for collaboration. Share it, and then you can start working on the other settings after the fact. So it's a basic text editing collaboration type tool. And as soon as you click share, it superimposes itself over other things like your chat and your people area, your participant pods. So you may need to reshare those or reorganize where those things are happening. But it can be merged as well up the top. So the notes can sit on the side if you want that to be the case. So have a play around with the notes tool. I think it's pretty neat, but we've got to find probably structured ways of using it to get the most out of it. Okay, that's notes. The record option, I'm sure that you're familiar with by now. It'll go 3, 2, 1 once we hit recording, but you have to decide whether you're saving it to the cloud, which is our preference, or whether you're saving it locally. I'm not going to talk about breakout rooms in the session today, but if someone wants to have a look at using them specifically with me, I'm happy to catch up with you and do that. Polls and quizzes, I mentioned before the term surveys, which is the tool that Zoom uses for all of those tools. You can create those question sets and launch them live in a meeting, or you can create them in advance and then share them and bring them into a new meeting if you want to. They are now created at your profile level. They used to be attached to individual meetings. Now they are actually attached to your profile. And the best way to engage with polls, quizzes, surveys in Zoom is probably to open your Zoom desktop application, and you'll find a tab called Surveys. So this is where you can create them and look at them in advance, or get the results and do things with those results after the fact as well. It's all now attached and available for you to engage with outside the live Zoom meeting as well. So it doesn't all have to be figured out on the go. All right, I realize I'm rushing here because I do want to have a look at the Brightspace aspect of Zoom. Whiteboards is another feature like notes that you can create in advance and share with people. but they can be shared outside of Zoom meetings. They don't need to be used live. You can create them separately and then give people the link to engage with it. Again, they can be shared publicly. They can be printed. They can be exported. They can be used within the live meeting. So if you haven't used Zoom whiteboards, again, this is worth playing with. And then you end up having activities where participants are doing things like adding sticky notes into that space. You need to give it structure, and then you decide how you want to share it. So it can be shared to either people in the live meeting, people just at CSU, people just that you give the hyperlink to, anyone, but it can also be embedded. So just as we embedded that clip before in a Brightspace subject site, you can embed your Zoom whiteboard in your subject site for people to engage with throughout the session. It's not specifically tied to a live Zoom meeting anymore. You can absolutely create whiteboards for people to use and engage with within your subject site. That particularly is a very cool feature. Not many whiteboard tools will allow themselves to be used in that way outside of their environment, like Teams or other tools. Okay, let's get into the Brightspace bit, and I realize I'm racing against the clock here. Okay, inside our Brightspace subject site, you could pre-release the whiteboard or the notes tool. Absolutely, Stuart. Any of those tools will work asynchronously, and you can send the links to them or embed them and make them available to people outside of the meeting itself. Okay, let's get into the online meeting tool itself. In your subject sites, underneath the communication menu, and using this tool, if you're teaching with Zoom in your in the session, is highly recommended. It basically is the way that you avoid having any access issues, because people have already authenticated by coming into your subject site before they attempt to join the meeting. That's the difference between you emailing them or sending the links to meetings in announcements. They may have problems with getting into the meetings themselves. Thanks, Robin. All right, so using the online meeting tool itself, you can either create meetings on the spot using that same type of process we went through before, topics, times, etc., and then the links will be available. Or if you've created the meeting in your Zoom backend, you can import it into your online meeting area. This is available for the hosts. If you created the meeting before as a host, as I did earlier on, I'm going to go into my meetings area in the Zoom portal, find the meeting that I want to bring into my subject site, and I need that meeting ID. So I'm going to copy that, Control C after I've highlighted it, go back into my subject site. This is our first screen when we come into the online meeting tool. And I'm going to click on these three dots to the top right and import. This is for those people who've created meetings in Zoom already and now want to bring that meeting in for their students. Import, paste that meeting ID in here, and now it will appear in the site for all of the students as well. Dan says, is it better to create recurring meetings for online classes via the Zoom portal or Brightspace? I prefer doing it myself in Brightspace, Dan, to be honest. I think it's a more straightforward way of doing it. And as soon as you create it on the spot, the other benefit we get out of it in Brightspace is that it will add those events directly to the subject calendar. So for example, Tuesday, July 15th is my first one at 6 o'clock. If I now look at my subject homepage in the calendar, let's open it up. Next Tuesday, did I actually... This is the difference between importing and in fact creating them on the spot. They're not there. Or was it next Tuesday? I'm going slightly insane. There it is. Right. There's my meeting on the 22nd. There's my Zoom meeting details. They've been added to the calendar, and students will be able to see those on the subject homepage and click on it and get the link as well through that. There's the link to join the meeting, so they can get that through their calendar as well, which is another way of, I guess, promoting attendance at those meetings. You'll find it in the subject calendar on the homepage under those upcoming events. It's the importance of giving a proper name to your Zoom meetings as well. If it's not clearly labeled, we might be going, what is that? All right, going back into the online meeting tool. It does always take a moment for it to load for me. I hope yours is a bit faster. Once you've held your meetings, they'll then appear underneath the previous meetings tab. So you can actually see what dates did I hold them for, and you can also get your attendance report from here. So at that point, you can see how many students, what times they came in, when they left, etc. from that report. And then last but not least, any recordings that you made, as long as they're cloud recordings, will appear in the cloud recording area. And you will have the option against those recordings to delete them, to individually decide using this publish all recordings option, toggle it on or off. You can decide which recordings students get access to. So they don't all have to be available to students by default. You can decide individually which ones I do and don't want the students to see. So if I can find a subject site as an example, let's go into this one, and hopefully they had Zoom meetings. This will be the last thing, and then I'll wrap things up, apart from those who want to stick around and chat. If we have a look at cloud recordings for this subject, they had heaps of them. These recordings are all available to students, so they can actually just click on the link and decide whether they want the recording, to play it within their browser, to download the file, to listen to the audio, or to get the chat file. Or your academics can decide, do I want to turn off visibility to individual recordings? So I've toggled that publish all recordings option, and now I can decide which ones I do and don't want students to get access to. All right, so that individual control of recordings, visibility to students, is done through that publish all recordings toggle. So it's quite a neat feature in that respect. All right, look, I'm going to stop there talking about the Brightspace integration, wrap things up for those of you that have to go. Thank you so much for joining me for another one of these sessions. I realize with Zoom there is always more to learn, which is why we keep doing refreshers around it. I'm going to stop the recording there, but I'm happy to chat around any individual questions that people have. And the recording and the slide deck will be available in the Teaching Academy channel shortly. So thank you all. And I'll just stop the recording first and then get into individual questions. Recording and stop.